Hi, Will Gethin here. Welcome to the second episode of Series 2 of the Follow Your Blissters podcast. In this episode, I talk with Tahir Shah, the intrepid writer, filmmaker, and insatiable adventurer, who's author of more than 50 books, including The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Trail of Feathers, and In Arabian Nights. In this conversation, we explore some of Tahir's outlandish travel quests in search of the hidden underbellies of lands through which he journeys, such as Africa, India, and Peru, as well as his pursuit of freedom as a writer, blazing a trail for other writers to follow. I hope you enjoy the journey. Hi Tahir, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, and I'm so thrilled to be with you, Will. Thank you.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you, Tahir. I believe you're back in your beloved Casablanca in Morocco, are you?
I am, and I've got so much to say about Casablanca, but it's like coming back to Casablanca is a bit like, you know, pulling an old pair of shoes that you love, they're a bit scuffed or very scuffed and worn, and putting them on again, and they fit just in the most spectacular way. And that is what Casablanca is to me. It is this cozy feel. It's a feel good place.
Fantastic. So you're bouncing down the street into the shanty town with your trainers on.
Exactly. Although the shantytown sadly is gone, long gone. But
Yes.
we'll get to that later, I think.
Yeah, I think you did mention that when we spoke briefly before. But let's talk about more about it in a bit. Well, it's an absolute honour to have you on this podcast. I mean, I'm really excited about having this conversation. I've read and loved quite a few of your books, many of which have had me laughing out loud, and I definitely want to read many more. I've also been inspired, maybe even envious, to some of your adventurous writer's life of boundless trouble and immersed in wild cultures and magical places. And now living in Morocco, of course, a country alive with a sense of the magical. And you actually probably played a part in inspiring me to become a travel writer some years back, which I did for a few years, a relatively short-lived stint working as a travel journalist before financial pressures brought that to a close, or at least a long pause. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your experiences of the hero's journey in your life. You've written lots and lots of travel books, or rather, there were 6 main travel books, weren't there, originally? Travel quest books, detailing some fascinating and outlandish personal quests through some of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. And many of these quests are, of course, fascinating hero's journeys in their own right. And if we now dive straight into your chosen hero's journey for this conversation, I wondered, Tahir, how your journey began. What was the call to adventure that led you on the path to the intrepid writer's life that you lead today?
You make it, thank you, Will. So you make it sound very, very glamorous, and thank you for that. But anyone, especially you, would know there is no glamour in the chosen path of being a travel writer or even an author, really. The truth is, it's hard graft. If you're doing it right, it's really hard work. And being a travel writer, the kind of work that I've done, it's incredibly miserable most of the time. But when you're having a really miserable time, when, for example, you're on a mountain in Western Ethiopia and you've got no skin on your feet and you're with mules who have mutinied and all kinds of bad stuff, all you know in the back of your head is that one day you can turn this into fantastic first-rate material. And
Absolutely.
it's been my kind of stock in trade. But to come back to your question, and I apologize, I'm very
No,
bad
but
at answering
that's what I
straight
mean. Really,
questions.
is what I mean is more that sense of this, that thirst for adventure and the creativity and the
Yeah,
zest and desire to create and the joy of
and
going in the chase of the journeys and the thrill of what will end up in a book.
exactly.
And that's as tough as it is, of course, and perhaps that's reminding me a little bit why I gave up.
You know,
There is something
Will,
about just feeling totally alive.
yeah, exactly. To answer your question, I think it comes down to my childhood and what it was like. Um, Actually, today at lunch, I was having lunch with my son, Timur, who's 18, and I was talking about his childhood and about mine. And I said to him, my childhood was, as he knew, in most of it in England, in this very beautiful house in near Tunbridge Wells in Kent. but it was a house filled with all kinds of travelers and crazy people who would turn up. Some of them very famous writers, like, I don't know, Doris Lessing or J.D. Salinger and others, but a lot of not famous people. And the thing was, my father and mother encouraged my sisters and me to always do things that were unusual or off piste. And for me, the traveling journey, the journey of a kind of itinerant travel writer began on at breakfast one morning. I remember I said at breakfast, gosh, I'm so interested in the dictatorships in Africa. You know, people like Idi Amin and these monsters, Mobutu Sese Seko, all kinds of crazy characters. And my father, without looking up from his newspaper, said, go to Africa, go and study there, go and learn and live in the dictatorships, and a path of adventure will open up. And
What a great
that's
dad.
exactly it's exactly what I did. He said to me, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm interested in dictatorships in Africa, for example," but never follow it up. And his thing was, his children, us, were kind of given this duty to to not just make statements, but to actually, you know, put our money where our mouth was and go in search. And for my dad, who was a writer called Idris Shah, his key thing in life was don't be a spectator. Don't just watch from the sidelines when you can get involved and you can go on a journey, whatever that journey is. That he would always say the important thing is not to plan too much, but just to make a decision and to go somewhere and see where the road takes you. And that's exactly what I did.
I love that. I think your father was totally inspired.
Yeah, some people would say that, but at the same time, I was discussing with my son Timur at lunch, as I said today, and I was saying only in hindsight that I could see that my father was inspired just by a lot of the time. I think for my two children, Timur and Ariane, it must seem that our lives in Morocco, where and their childhoods, it must seem that their childhoods were insane to them because you can only see that with hindsight.
Well, if we could wind the clock a little bit back and just get a picture of your
Yeah.
childhood and what life was like growing up and how that sowed the seeds for you to become a writer, explorer, and adventurer. You were, of course, surrounded by many wonderful writers during your childhood and were born into a family of writers. As you say, your dad, Idris Shah, was a prominent writer and thinker. You had many great author friends, many of whom convened at your family home, Langton House in the English countryside. Where actually was Langton House, by the way?
So it's just near Tunbridge Wells,
Oh,
which is
okay.
about an hour from London,
Yeah,
and
my parents live
it
in
was.
Tunbridge Wells. Yeah,
Oh my God! Well, that
they just
that
moved
is a
there.
remarkable coincidence, and strangely, um, I realized later because I didn't at the time. Um, the house where we grew up, Langton House, was the house where Baden Powell, who founded the Boy Scouts, grew up. And I didn't really realize it at the time because I didn't know much about Baden Powell. But I grew up in Baden Powell's bedroom, and I actually went to the same prep school as Baden Powell. And Baden Powell also had this kind of adventurous streak, of course, because he founded the Boy Scouts.
Yeah,
And I look back and I think that was quite interesting. But
yeah. Again, I read about this in your book, The Reason to Write, which of course we share much of your writer's journey from childhood up to through your publishing journey. So
exactly.
yeah,
And
I've read a bit about this. Yeah,
and well, when I think back at my childhood, it was this bizarre rumpus of people and experiences. But when I think back at our childhood, the one thing I remember more than anything is the sound of a manual typewriter typing from morning till night, and it was my father typing. And I realize now as a writer that he was putting in the hard graft that you know all writers have to do. You've got to do the work. If you don't do the work, the books don't get written. And he was kind of, instead of ever talking about writing, he was showing it. And as I say, what he did more than anything was to encourage us to go on adventures of our own, whether they were just adventures around the corner or through the village or across Africa and the world.
Yeah, I love how you describe your your father sort of clattering away on the typewriter in his study in your book, The Reason to Write, which you refer to as the musical score of your youth. I love also how you describe your dad at his typewriter as a kind of like a knight in shining armour doing battle with a dragon, which really brings the idea of the hero's journey or writer's journey to life. And you also describe in that book how when you were at boarding school, at prep school, you zoned out in what you call Tahir land, a magical fantasy realm that you created as a safe and happy place for daydreaming as a way to survive what you describe as the traumas of living at boarding school. Can you tell me a little bit about Tahir land and how it helped you to survive?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like like so many kids, um, I was incapable of doing the work that I was expected to do, largely because I was and I am profoundly dyslexic. I can't spell. I still can't spell. Fortunately, I've got a computer that helps me. But when I was at prep school, particularly, and actually it was this prep school in Tunbridge Wells where Baden Powell had gone to, it was in the 1970s, and it was a really kind of a cruel place. And there was a particularly cruel master who really, he kind of waged war against me for years. And so I used to just zone out. I would look out the window and I would slip into this realm, which was my own little kingdom. It was like a fiefdom, and it was Tahir land. And of course, I was the king and the judge and the emperor and anything I wanted to be in my own land. And I realized that if I could slip through into this world, if I could embrace it and imagine every detail of it in kind of crystal, I don't know, panavision, then I had this strength, this place where no horrid school teachers or anyone else could ever get to. This is my safe place, and it it was the one thing that helped form my imagination. And I'm quite proud to say now that I have a really fully loaded sense of imagination. And
You
so I
certainly
have
do.
to I have to thank the measly teacher who made my life hell. And recently, I thanked him in a book. In a book I wrote, I actually thanked him because he made it possible. Without that suffering, I wouldn't have, the imagination that I do have.
I was about to ask you that exactly same question actually, whether you know having whether those traumas that you endured actually were things that you should be grateful for because you end up being a writer because of it. And what amazing training ground that was, that Tahir land for being at the writer that you are now.
Well, exactly. And imagination. I mean, I just want to say this that to me, as humans, there is nothing more special. There is nothing. Okay, people say love. Yes, love. But imagination is way up there with love. And this is something that is indescribably important in my life. That when I see children playing with, sticks, I've just saw this afternoon here in Morocco, two kids having a play fight with two bits of wood, and I thought to myself, yes, they still haven't had this weaned out of them. They have, imagination is the currency of childhood. It is the one thing that runs through all our veins as children.
Yes, and so you really encourage that in your children now.
I've encouraged it,
Well, yeah, they're now virtually grown up, aren't they? But
yeah, 18 and 21. But I encourage them to look at situations and to appreciate stories and everything in a way that children do. Um, I, you know, I, I remember when my daughter Ariane was very small, living in Casablanca at our house, she was making something out of Lego. And I asked her, just like every adult would do, it was just a sort of glotch of bricks. And I said, Ariane, what are you making? And she said, it's a dinosaur, Baba. And then um, and then it fell on the ground and it broke. All the pieces broke apart. And I said to her, Ariane, what is it now? And without batting an eyelid, she said, Baba, it is now the sky at night with all the stars. And that is how a child thinks. And my desperation is for human society, particularly the West, the Occidental society, to go back and think like that. Just like when we watch movies, when we watch Star Wars, we lock into it, or the Marvel movies, or we don't need to be told this isn't really true because we believe.
Well, I'm really enjoying. I've got a little 2.5-year-old, and she's just at the stage where she's starting to watch movies, and we've been watching lots of Winnie the Pooh movies, and yeah, it's just so lovely to open up that whole sort of imagination landscape in her and see how she just loves talking about it, and then playing the characters and
Exactly.
yeah.
But Will, the really key point here is that is the default setting of all humanity. If I go to the countryside in Morocco, or into Latin America, into the jungle where I've been, you find that societies do not differentiate so strongly between fact and fantasy. It's a hybrid. Human society has this natural hybrid between the two. And it's something that drives me crazy in the West. Everyone, on the back of a book, they'll write, this is fiction, or this is fact, or fantasy. And our human society doesn't naturally do that. We embrace it all as one great thing.
Yeah. So if we get back onto the journey and sort of cross the threshold, if you like, to begin the journey for real. So flying to Nairobi in Kenya began the stage that Joseph Campbell, the founder of the Hero's Journey, refers to as the road of trials. And of course, many trials indeed did lie ahead for you. But how was it being a student in Africa?
It was the middle of the 80s, and I found a little American university in Nairobi, and I registered. I was the only foreign student, and I registered to study international relations there and to learn about African dictatorships, which was my great love.
Yeah.
And it was an eye-opening adventure for me. Something that was important that I found was that the people who were studying there came from mostly very underprivileged families, but their families and even their villages had often clubbed together to send one person to the university for an education. And so I made lifelong friendships, and I started traveling. And I remember traveling by myself, always hitchhiking from Nairobi first. I used to go to Kampala, where there was still fighting. It was so exciting. And I'd arrive kind of by bus or by truck, hitchhiking, as I say. I went up to Luwero, where the killing fields of Uganda were. And then I went westwards into what was then Zaire and Rwanda and Burundi before the fighting of the 90s. And I had these extraordinary adventures that showed me that there was a lot more to the world, to life in the world, than I had found in Langton House, where I had been growing up until then. And I realized something which was kind of my eureka moment. I realized there is an entire amazing world out here, and it's like a recreation park. All I have to do to embrace it all is just to believe, and rather like a dream, to step into it, and it will materialize and it'll look after me. And so that's what I did. And I started doing these journeys, which got kind of wilder and wilder. Firstly, through Africa, as I say, and then through, Pakistan and Hindu Kush and India, and then through Latin America as well. And when I was in my very early 20s, I turned those first travels into a book called Beyond the Devil's Teeth.
I read it. Yeah.
It wasn't a great book.
I thought it was great. I mean, it's not the strongest.
It got me writing,
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And that's what is the first step on the ladder. It's proving to yourself that you can write a book. It's much easier than than it sounds.
I remember laughing a lot in that book. It's years since I wrote it, but I remember there were some very funny, sort of outlandish characters. You have a tremendous way of of portraying these characters in a very comic way, which I love. How did that book come about? Because you'd crossed a few continents, hadn't you, and had all these notebooks under your bed, and you described in The Reason to Write, and then you sort of worked out how to piece together a book from those. So tell me how that came about.
Yeah, I had done a lot of journeys, a lot of kind of zigzagging, and I'm a zigzagger in life, and everything I do is mostly not planned very much, because I think if you plan in kind of at a granular level, spontaneity doesn't happen. So I try not to plan very much, which is really convenient because it's very boring planning. And I had done all these disparate journeys, and then I realized that in truly ancient times, 65 million years ago, ancient times, the continents were all joined up together, and supposedly. And Africa, India, Latin America were connected, and they were called, in the 19th century, they were renamed, the landmass was called Gondwana land. And strangely, Gondwana land was named after this kind of Aboriginal tribe in central India called the Gonds, by a geologist, actually. And so it was like making a coat from all these journeys. And I went in search of the tribe, the Gonds in central India, and I kind of fashioned this cloak of journeys, really. And I was incredibly enthusiastic, and I thought the book was fabulous that I had written, although it wasn't published, and it was at first, and it was a manuscript form. And whenever I was invited to dinners or whatever, I'd always have it with me in a plastic bag, the manuscript. And I found it really hard to get published because, as anyone knows who is an author, breaking in is a really, really hard thing to do.
Well, yeah, it was fascinating to read in The Reason to Write about, I think it was The Reason to Write, I read it, but how you described that challenge. I mean, the hero's journey at this stage of the journey is, a lot of it's about the challenges. And of course, this was one of the great challenges you faced at this time, wasn't it? The challenge of getting published. And you describe how you wrote to probably every agent in London and got
exactly
only rejection letters. And then, I was meaning to ask you actually, just to tell our listeners, because it's such an amusing story, about how you then created this fictitious character as an agent, as your own agent yourself, being your own agent, William Watkins, to sell your own book. And yes, tell us about that.
No, that was exactly it. So I couldn't get an agent. And I realized if you wanted a publisher, it's like a filtration system. If you want a publisher, you've got to get an agent. And you can't get an agent if you haven't had an agent before, and you can't get a publisher if you haven't had a publisher before. It's this phony system, which we'll talk about later. But I got really bugged, and so what I did was I borrowed some money off my sister, my twin sister, and I had a very, very grand letterheading made called Worldwide Media, and
very grand.
I then, a great name, and like the letterheading covered like a third of the page because it was just such a grand letterheading, and it was multicolor, and then I sent the manuscript to quite a few publishers, and I signed the letter William Watkins, editor-in-chief, as if I was taken on by the editor-in-chief himself, and no one called back. But then, I went into a massive slump, and I was under my duvet, and it was like Tuesday afternoon, and I was still under my duvet, and the phone rang, and a voice on the other end said it was an editor at a well-known publishing company, and she said she wanted to buy, or she asked if the rights were still available, and I said, well, I'm only the receptionist, I said, but I'd be happy to put you through to William Watkins, the editor-in-chief. And I remember I went into my little kitchen in my bedsit and I made a sandwich, and I left because I thought William Watkins was so important that he would never be available immediately. So I wasn't. And then I made my sandwich and I ate it. And then I went, and the editor was waiting. And by this point, she assumed William Watkins was like the most important person in the world. And William Watkins, who was me, putting on a funny voice, squeaky voice, explained that the book was for sale, but some big publishing houses were interested. So the long and the short of it is they bought Beyond the Devil's Teeth, and more importantly, they said to me, "What is the next book that I'd want to do?" Because that, of course, is the important thing. A publisher doesn't just want one book; they want a series of books.
Yes.
And so suddenly I got onto the gravy train, which it was not a lucrative gravy train, but it was a gravy train, chain nonetheless.
Can I ask, at what point did, presumably they must have found out sooner or later that you created this William Watkins character. At what point did that become revealed?
No, they didn't. They didn't find out.
No, they didn't.
No.
Well, they must have done by now if they've read your books at all.
Maybe they have, but I did keep it a secret. And then I elaborated, though, and I made a whole backstory for William Watkins. At one time, he took me skiing, and I had all kinds of sort of bits of backstory for William Watkins, and enjoyed that immensely. But then finally, I moved agencies, and I signed up with a real agent. And I should say that William Watkins, fictitious William Watkins, was far better than any other agent I've ever had, and far more fun.
Well, your second book, of course, was The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was the first book of yours that I read. In fact, it was recommended to me before I went on a big sabbatical trip to India to try and write a book of my own at the time. And it shares your extraordinary time training with the fearsome magician Hakim Feroz in Calcutta in India, before being sent travelling across the country on a journey of observation to witness how India's fakirs and holy men use some of these sleight of hand techniques that you became privy to. And I love how you just hilariously describe at the start of the book, if you like, the call to adventure to embark on this kind of wild sorcerer's quest. And while you'd already had a taste of learning magic in your childhood with that character, the Pashtun character Hafiz Jan. Is it Hafiz Jan or Hafiz Jan? Or?
Yeah, no, Hafiz Jan, exactly.
And he was the guardian of your father's tomb, wasn't he? I mean,
an ancestor's tomb, the tomb of Jan Fashan Khan.
Sorry, ancestor's tomb.
Whose name meant he was an Afghan warlord. And, my ancestor was called Jan Fashan Khan, which means he who scatters souls in battle. And as so often happened in our childhood, people would turn up, and this guy Hafiz Jan, who was the guardian, or the son of the son of the son of the original guardian, turned up at Langton House in Kent, and he had a premonition that I would have an accident, a terrible accident. He didn't say that he would be the cause of the terrible accident, which because of one of his magic tricks. Hafiz Jan was an amateur magician, and he took me under his wing, and I was about, 8 or something. And he taught me very, very dangerous magic tricks, the kind of things that Harry Houdini had originally made his name doing, mostly using dangerous chemicals. And I vowed that one day when I was old enough, I would go to India and I would find him and learn magic from him, Hafiz Jan. And he actually sent me to Hakim Feroz, his teacher, who was a magician in India, in Kolkata.
Yeah, if I could just pause there a sec. There's a short extract from this book I'd love just to quickly read, which describes, in a sense, the call to adventure that you had to go on this journey to go and become a sorcerer's apprentice. And you describe going to this dinner party. You write the call that comes at the dinner party. So you write, a room full of supposed friends jabbered on about their sensible cars, their sensible jobs, and their sensible plans for a sensible future. This was a world of ruche curtains, floral print wallpaper, asparagus souffle, and French cuff shirts. Such preoccupations were at odds with my own. I yearned to rediscover the thrill of spontaneity, once fostered so intensely by Hafiz Jan's magic. I longed for adventure, for discovery and wonder. The idea of a secure, planned future was severely disturbing. My sensible friends swiveled to face me. Would I at last buy a sensible pad with ruched curtains and florid wallpaper? Could I be counted on to fall in line? Why didn't I take up golf or learn to dish up an asparagus souffle once in a while? Surely the time had come to get some decent shirts with proper French cuffs. Swelling their port, the Inquisition awaited my answer. I mulled over my position. Why should I adopt their bourgeois lifestyle, their materialistic trappings when nothing but illusion, the blood-red port whirled around like one of Hafiz Jan's precious chemicals? Illusion, Hafiz Jan, my mind set to work. Why not escape? Why not leave all this behind and embark on a great adventure? You can keep your sensible cars, clothes and prim little houses, I bellowed. I'm off to India to become a magician. I love that. I remember reading that just before heading off.
And actually, Will, that's kind of the story of my life. It has always been to not choose, the sensible, easy route. My life is always about doing kind of, I don't know, the other route, the other fork in the road, the one that might seem absurd to most people. Well, if it's absurd, that's where I want to go.
That totally chimed with me at the time. I was about to head off to India on my own on a wild adventure, if you like, and I was totally sort of feeling this sense of I don't want this predictable, material, conventional life with a sensible car and a sensible job and a sort of house and a sort of two kids and a Volvo and the rest of it. So yeah, I remember having those thoughts. So it totally chimed with me. So anyway, the training with this legendary illusionist Feroz was of course ferocious, actually, wasn't it? It was an extreme road of trials all on its own. Can you share briefly an insight into this eccentric and illusionist hacking Feroz and how you came to train with him?
Yeah, so I was sent by Hafiz Jan, the ancestral guardian of my ancestor's tomb, and I tracked down Hakim Feroz in Calcutta, but he didn't want to take me on as a pupil because he had retired. But I should say he was beyond being a magician. He was really a sadist. That was his métier, and he saw me as a masochist needing a sadist, and he was a sadist needing a masochist. So I went to stay with him in his villa in Alipur outside Calcutta, or in the suburbs. And he said, and this was a very important thing in my life, he said, before learning magic, before learning anything, you have to be prepared. And this is something that my father, who wrote a lot of books about Sufis and Sufism, would discuss. He would always say, in the West, people want, they want to be given answers before they're prepared as students. My father's thing was always, you can't plant a crop in the ground until you've prepared the ground. And Hakim Feroz saw me very much as baked earth that needed to be prepared in order to receive the teachings he could give me.
Yes.
So he would make me do things like dig an entire ditch with a teaspoon, and this was in incredible heat, or go into Calcutta and search out secrets of people's, for example, he got me to search out interesting people and learn their secrets. So I befriended the ancestral hangman of Calcutta. And I asked the hangman, who was just a great guy, and I asked him, what is your secret? And he said, I haven't really got any secrets. I just try and kill people, hang them as painlessly as possible. And I screamed once, please tell me, you must have a secret. And he looked at me sideways, the hangman, and with a noose in his hands. And he said, all right, since you've come so often and since you're begging me, I'll tell you the secret. Don't tell anyone else. And he said, it's bananas. You always rub a banana into the rope by which you're going to hang someone, because then the knot slides all the faster. So details like that were kind of useful in that, although I haven't become a hangman myself, I used information like that in my life, and I've learned to look for details and to kind of suck them up and, dole them out as needed. But that time in Calcutta, it showed me, my travel to India showed me that there's a bedrock in every culture, in every society. It's even, when you're in boring old, London or wherever, it's right there. If you tap down to the bedrock, it's there waiting for you. There's amazing stuff to find. It's just a matter of changing your perception. It's a matter of looking at things in a different way. And that's what I learned through my time in India, that um, if you adjust the way you perceive things, there's wonders everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. And the hardships that Faroes put you through, I mean, I think I remember rightly, there's one where you had to sort of crawl around on broken glass. Is that right?
Yeah, there was a lot of crawling around on broken glass, and I mean, there was worse than that. The worst thing that, for me, in hindsight, was swallowing
The stones,
round
yeah.
pebbles. Yeah, which were, I mean, I was going to say they were like marbles, but they were much bigger. And then um, I had to swallow this. It was called syrup of ipecac, I think, and it would enable me to vomit them out. Sorry, folks, it's kind of gross, but um, but I had at some points I had so many pebbles in my stomach that it made life very, very unpleasant for
God.
quite a long time.
And would you say that these hardships actually had any practical use in helping your training in magic?
Yes. Um, I mean, learning anything on a wider level that is so out of your kind of off radar, off piste, out of your comfort zone, particularly, I think, when it involves details, um, that has a way of kind of stretching you. And my time in, gosh, on all my journeys, on all my hard travel quests, but particularly in India,
Mm.
it was all about, one of my favorite quotations of all time. It's an Arab quotation, and it is that much travel is needed before the raw man is ripened.
Yes, I
And
remember that in your book. Yeah.
yeah, I was so strongly a raw man.
Yeah.
And I realized little bit by little bit, I was getting ripened,
Yeah.
but more importantly, ripened not in a way that I expected to be ripened, but in a way that happened, I don't know, without planning, in a kind of a zigzag way. And that was all the more valuable to me. And it prepared me for the life that I've been living ever since.
Hi, this is Will here again. That bell was just to alert you that we're going to take a quick break so I can tell you about the different ways to listen to and engage with this podcast. I really hope you're enjoying this episode. For Series 2, I'm releasing episodes monthly on Wednesdays on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and all major podcast channels where you also can subscribe. Any ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts would be greatly appreciated, as they really help to let others know about Follow Your Blisters. And don't forget, we're spelling blisters with a double S on the bliss. To find out more about this podcast and the hero's journey, please head to my website, consciousfrontiers.com, where you can sign up to the monthly newsletter for news and updates and follow our social channels. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to the journey. So would you say that they help to kind of build these sort of types of challenges, help to build your resilience and resourcefulness for living the life that you live?
Completely. I mean, I think, Will, it's shown me that, when we're adolescents and when we're kids, we're always taught you've got to do it X, Y, Z. You've got to do it this way, because if you don't do it this way, it's not going to work. But I've learned that if you keep going and you believe in yourself, and you look at the horizon and beyond the horizon, you train your vision to the horizon after this one, and you keep going, all kinds of doors open and opportunities present themselves, which no one could have imagined would have
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah.
And
well, that sounds a bit like Joseph Campbell's famous quote, follow your bliss and the universe will open doors, but before there are only walls. The idea of actually just going for it, boldly doing the thing that you should be doing rather than holding back. And then when you commit to it, then all these doors could start to open and support seems to come in.
That is so true.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so absolutely true, because just because you can't see the doors, just because you can't see them, it doesn't mean they're not there. They are there. They're usually within easy reach, but you have to believe. You've got to, I almost see it like I just got a flash in my head of Eddie the Eagle Edwards, sliding off that giant slalom or giant whatever it is, ski jump, and he's got to believe that he'll land because that's the only way you can get through a big ski jump. And it's sort of like that. A big quest is a bit like a big ski jump. You can't quite see the other end of the jump, but doesn't mean that you won't land safely. You'll have an adventure, but you will land at some point.
Yes, well, that takes us neatly onto your next book, aptly titled Trail of Feathers, a trail that you perhaps didn't know where you were going to end up, but you set off on the quest anyway to find what you call the flying birdmen of Peru, having heard stories that the Incas may have flown or maybe glided in primitive canopies. And you travelled around to some of Peru's fated sacred sites, and the quest led you on this perilous boat voyage down the Amazon to stay with the legendary Schwa tribe of head shrinkers who you hoped would unveil the secret of primitive flight. They were famed for poisonous darts and black magic, and rumoured to be murderous cannibals and dangerous devil worshippers. And preparing to set off down the Amazon, you write of not being able to remember ever feeling so overcome with expectation, and of being filled with fear at the prospect of giant insects, venomous reptiles, and die-hard tribes that prey on the ignorant. And I wonder, what your relationship is to fear. Facing and overcoming fear is an important part of the hero's journey. And I'm interested to hear about your relationship to fear, and whether you look upon fear as an ally or whether you follow your fear. What's your relationship to fear?
Gosh, Will, it's such an interesting question. I have this kind of obsession, and I don't think I've ever really talked about it. It is to get out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And to do something that is deeply uncomfortable, and usually with me, that it embraces fear. As a child, I was deeply fearful of all kinds of things. I was terrified that there were monsters under my bed. I was terrified of, darkness and of all kinds of stuff. And I learned, though, that the only way I could be happy, ultimately, I learned, was by facing this fear or embracing it.
Yeah.
And so on so many of my journeys, gosh, I've done stuff that has really confronted fear in a very absolute way. And I remember, going to the Upper Amazon and going into the jungle, which I really am so scared of because
on this trip.
I'm a terrible phobic of big spiders, particularly.
Well, you have plenty of those. Yeah.
There are gigantic tarantulas, and we were camping often with nests of tarantulas all around us, and terrified.
Horrific.
And I'm I'm just a wimpy weakling, but I on all my journeys, I've just forced myself to damn well get on with it, and it's always, it's always paid off.
And you also had giant rodents on the boat, didn't you, down the Amazon?
Yes, yeah. Well, a lot of them were eaten. They were these peccary. They were gigantic kind of rat-like things. But on this boat that I had, which was a bit like the African Queen, if anyone remembers that Bogart movie, it had these spiders with 9 eyes, wolf spiders, and it was infested, and they would be all over you all night.
Oh my word!
I'm really arachnophobic.
Horrific.
But what an interesting time that was. I spent a lot of time with a tribe called the Shuar, who, as you said, they used to shrink human heads. But what interested me so greatly with that was that the human heads, which they shrunk, and you see them online sometimes, or you see them in museums, they only shrunk the human heads of their conquered enemies. They shrunk them to placate and to silence the avenging soul of the enemy. As far as they were concerned, the head itself had no value, no meaning at all.
Wow.
But I had an extraordinarily interesting time in the Upper Amazon.
Yeah. Well, the secret of the primitive flight, of course, lay with the Shuar's, it turned out, ritual drinking of this legendary of the legendary psychedelic brew ayahuasca. And on ayahuasca, they would fly across the jungle to the spirit world, the other world. And you explain in your book, I think in The Reason to Write, or is it in this book, well, probably both actually, in this book, The Trail of Feathers, how the Shuar actually believe that our world is an illusion and that the other world is real. So they take the ayahuasca so they can fly into the real world to find the answers for problems in our illusionary earthbound world. And of course, you drank ayahuasca with them and you experienced flying to this other world. How was that for you? And can you relate to the Shuar's perception of our world being an illusion?
Gosh, absolutely. Because I just want to say this first, and it is that in our lives, we often think, if we go in search of an answer for something, we think, oh, we've got a general idea of what the answer is going to be. It's going to be in this kind of frequency or bandwidth. But what I always find most interesting is when the answer is totally different than the one we have kind of in the back of our heads. And this was certainly the case with the Shuar. I was trying to investigate in a very zigzag way why the Spanish conquistadors had written that the Incas flew over the jungle like birds. It seems such an odd thing to write in their huge journals. And I found that the Shuar were taking this hallucinogen, ayahuasca, which is it's a monoamines oxidizing inhibitor. It's a very strange, complicated kind of a tea, and it gives you the idea, the feeling that you're growing wings and you're flying, and it was totally not what I was expecting, but so valuable. And exactly as you say, the tribe believe that the world around us is an illusion, and that's all well and good and all great, but it doesn't really exist. And they say that in moments of crisis for the tribe, or when there's a problem, they need to take ayahuasca in order to grow wings and to fly into the real world to find answers for the illusionary world in which they live. And I found that extraordinary and so advanced, sort of philosophically. So shocking.
Did you find answers to your own questions back in the illusory / real world?
Maybe, to be honest, maybe not as many answers as I should have found. Ayahuasca, if anyone knows about it, you vomit and then defecate uncontrollably, and depending on the admixtures mixed up with the ayahuasca, I passed out for about 24 hours. And
oh, did you? Wow.
And it's quite a shocking experience, actually. And I mean that quite as in, like, really shocking. And I woke up, I remember, in a pen full of pigs down at the river, and I was naked. I was in a really wretched state. But I felt I had been on a journey, and who knows, maybe I had been on a journey to the real world.
Yeah, you write in your book that I think it's in the new introduction to the Trail of Feathers. You write that that the experience of taking ayahuasca changed you from the inside out. How did it change you, would you say?
It changed me because it stripped away all kind of preconceptions that I had to, travel and trying to get a straight answer about anything. I felt that I was suddenly part of kind of, again, the default setting of humanity, which is, it is to embrace a truly ancient cultural system. Who knows how long ayahuasca has been taken in the Upper Amazon in Peru? I suppose it's been taken for millennia. I mean, there's no reason. It's not something that was just discovered or understood recently. This is probably, ayahuasca probably predates written, writing systems and all kinds of other stuff.
I'm sure.
This is as old and as profound as it gets, and to be part of that and to engage with it was kind of the most mesmerizing thing I've ever experienced.
Well, yeah, that was another fascinating quest and a book that I really enjoyed personally. And I think you wrote 3 further non-fiction travel quest books, including, I love this title, it's so intriguing, The Search for King Solomon's Mines, which took you to Ethiopia to try and uncover Solomon's lost gold. But anyway, we won't have time to probably go into these particular books. But of course, writing, as you've said, can be a very tough path to tread, and I imagine very difficult to sustain and afford a family. And I know you have 2 kids, but you're now an acclaimed author of 50 or more books, and you've clearly made your way. But I wonder, during your earlier years of those travel quests, did you ever struggle financially and think about throwing in the towel and getting a sensible job that paid the bills?
Gosh, always. I've always struggled financially, always. And always. And as time has gone on, though, at first I would look at my friends, just like you said, with their posh little sensible dinner parties and
Ruche
jobs
curtains.
and banks and ruche curtains and jobs in banking or corporate, whatever. I don't even understand what any of those jobs are. And then I've seen these people who are still, some of whom are still my friends. I've seen them as they've progressed, and to think about it and to look at them, as I often do, I see that a lot of them are unfulfilled somehow because they never got to go on the great adventures that I did, or they never got, okay, I just got a flash of this. One morning I arrived from Ethiopia, and I had been on the night flight from Addis Ababa and been looking for King Solomon's gold mines, as you said.
Yeah.
And I was at Heathrow, waiting for the Heathrow Express to take me into central London. And my luggage was festering, rotting. They were these military kit bags that I had filled with equipment and stuff and rock samples and stuff. And I didn't look like Indiana Jones because he was always too suave, but I looked like a kind of a mixture between a homeless guy and and a gold a prospector. And I thought to myself, you bastards, you all the trim prim banker types who were on the platform that morning. I thought, I've been living. You're there with your your filofaxes and your mobile phones, and I thought, at least I'm living. And that to me is so much more important, and I really mean it. It's so much
Yeah,
more
no, I
important
totally
to me
agree.
than having a big bank balance. Yes, God, it would be great to have a lot of cash in the bank. But if I had a lot of cash in the bank, I would just go on a big expedition into the jungle. I just do it on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So I'm probably a bit irresponsible in that way. I would never settle down. I would never not go on the journeys, because I want to live. That's what I want to do. I want to feel the kind of, I don't know, the roughness of life, the real journey. I want to have those experiences.
Yeah. I resonate entirely. Having read The Reason to Write, I know you started to become very despondent about the publishing industry and fed up with having to compromise your own writing to give them what they considered would sell books, rather than staying faithful to your own vision for your books. And this was ultimately to lead you to break from the industry and publish your own work, which we'll come on to. But at what point did this despondency with the publishing industry set in, would you say? Would it have started by the time you finished those 6 first Travel Quest books?
Absolutely. And actually, the publisher, I won't name them, but the ones who bought my book, Beyond the Devil's Teeth, from William Watkins, me being William Watkins, the editor took me to a lunch, and I was in my 20s, and she was very kind, but she took me to a lunch, to a restaurant. It was just me. And she said to me, it's a rather expensive restaurant, so we suggest you don't order a starter, which, okay, 20 years later, I'm still going on about this. But to me, that's kind of the lousiest thing to say, especially to a starving young writer. It meant it's above your pay grade to have a starter. So we don't actually think you're worth a starter. And then I went to a publisher that I
Classic.
absolutely loved. Yeah, I went to this publisher called John Murray, who I loved, and they have published Darwin and Jane Austen and me, and much more famous people than me, of course. And they sold out, but I remember they pointed to something like roast suckling pig for 6, and they suggested that I take that. And I liked that they were generous. They were kind of old school, but I realized what's happened with publishing is it's become a kind of mediocre marketing business. And publishers, I've got quite a lot to say about mediocre publishers. They don't really care about the authors. They care about trying to sell the books. And okay, maybe that sounds a bit obvious, but to me, all that really matters is the authors and their well-being. Uh, um, and to allow authors to create books that they want to create.
Yeah.
So a couple of times, publishers asked me to rework books in a way that I was totally unhappy with, and then they would grit their teeth and they would remind me that they were paying me in advance, and that I felt like I was being held hostage, and I didn't react very well.
Yes. So, I mean, just sort of feeling my way into at what point we enter the sort of dark wood stage of the journey, and I wondered whether there was this sense of disillusionment with the publishing world, perhaps a time of confusion and uncertainty about your future in terms of sticking with writing at lower ebbs, whether there was a time we enter into sort of like this dark wood stage, which is sort of characterized by being the sort of dark heart of the journey where you can feel stuck or lost or hopeless, and the place where you meet your deepest fears and the shadow and death and rebirth, so you can sort of move through that and be reborn. And of course, it was through, ultimately leaving the publishing world in terms of starting your own path as a self-published writer that you did break through. So I'm guessing there was probably a sort of dark wood in the midst of getting to that point. So yeah,
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's such a good point, Will. What tends to happen in life, I think, looking in hindsight, you always get a moment of elation, which is good.
Yeah.
And then you get a moment of reflection, which makes you realize that the moment of elation, the elation came at a price. So what happened was I wrote, as you said, quite a few travel quests, which I only did because I really wanted to do them as journeys. I was happy to write them as books, but that was never my intention. My intention, really deep down, was to have an incredible journey, and if I could knock out a book at the end, so much the better. Then I bought the house that we've touched on, called Da Khalifa in Casablanca, which was a haunted mansion set in the middle of a fully loaded Moroccan shanty town. And it seemed like an odd thing to do, but for me, it's what I was going to do and I was doing. And uh, I was told by my agent, hey, I could make some money for you if you were to write a book about renovating the house. And, it's a kind of like a year in Provence sort of a thing. So I wrote a proposal. I got quite a big advance, actually, a very big advance. And then the publishers on both sides of the Atlantic, who were both parts of, a huge publishing empire, they said to me, well, great, this is done really well. What's your next book? And I said, well, I'm going to do a book on, I don't know, Afghanistan or something. And they said, oh, no. We need the same kind of book. What they meant was we need the same book all over again, but just with a different title. And that's what, and I wrote a book about stories and storytelling in Morocco, which again interested me greatly. But if I had kept going on that route, they would have had me write the same book about Morocco and about, twists and turns of living in a haunted palace in Morocco. They would have had me write that again and again and again, because it was the fountain that kept giving.
Yeah.
It was a gold mine. And I thought, no, I've done this. I'm not going to do this again. I want to do other stuff. So I had wanted to write a historical novel, and all of them, even my agent, said, "Well, you can't write a historical novel. You're a travel writer." My point was, I don't give a damn what you think I am. I'm going to do whatever I like. So I kind of began going off piste, which really um, opened every door I've ever wanted to open,
Yeah.
And then I've written all kinds of other genres. And, the person, Will, who comes into my head so often is the American film director, Stanley Kubrick.
Mm.
Stanley Kubrick's films, some of them are just bizarre as anything. But Stanley Kubrick he could have made endless sci-fi films, but he made one, 2001: Space Odyssey. He could have made endless, horror movies, but he made pretty much one, The Shining. He made whatever he did, and when he had learned from it and been satisfied, he moved on to something else. And I think that is a lesson for all creative people. Don't be typecast, because if you're typecast, you don't learn anymore.
Yeah.
And what I'm fascinated about writing and about anything creating is to learn and to do it for my own self-interest.
Yeah, I'm just sort of still diving a little bit around the dark wood aspect of the journey. I wondered, like you write in The Reason to Write about how real writers have to descend into the darkness to reach the magic zone. And I wonder, for you, is there a place where you can go into a place of darkness on some of your books to get there?
Absolutely. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I published really a very large book. It's like 700 pages, and it's called The Reason to Write, as you say. It started because a friend of mine he wanted to write a novel, and he said, could I write him a page and email it over to him about how to write a novel? And I wrote him a page, and then I wrote another page, and then I wrote 500 more pages. And
And you
then I
couldn't
was still
stop.
writing, and I couldn't stop because I had so much to say.
Yeah.
And the point, can I just say this? When I was a kid, as I said, all kinds of people would turn up, and one of them was J.D. Salinger, who wrote Catcher
Yes.
in the Rye. He
Yeah.
was a huge friend and fan of my father's.
Yes.
And once when he left, and I was about 8, he had come over to the house. I said to my parents, "Who was that guy?" And my dad said that was J.D. Salinger. He wrote a very important book called Catcher in the Rye. And I said, "Why does J.D. Salinger," and I couldn't even pronounce it, "why does he write?" And my father said, "Because if he doesn't write, he will turn to stone." And my feeling and that's why I called this book The Reason to Write.
Yeah.
My feeling with that is that there are two kinds of writers. There are two kinds of creative people. There are the ones who are trying to get attention, maybe, or trying to, be thought of better. But then it's like being a secret addict. There are people who write because they have to. It's like painters who have to paint, or actors who have to act, even if they're just walking down the street. And it's so important to me that writing is a mania. Most real writers I know only get self-satisfaction if they're working, if they're creating, and that's keeping them sane. Otherwise, gosh, they're pretty much on the ropes. They're not altogether there.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the journey, we move from the dark wood of the despondency with the publishing industry, despair at the publishing industry, and then you breaking free from the publishing industry, publishing your own books, giving yourself the freedom to write what you wanted, unrestrained by the shackles of publishing. And how did it feel to break free?
It felt incredibly good to break free. And it did mean, of course, I'd have to take myself to lunch if I wanted a good fat lunch. I'd have to, invite myself to lunch, or
Would you get a starter?
I would have a starter and a amuse-bouche, a main course, the best bottle of wine I could afford, or whatever. But it allowed me critically to hire. All I did was I hired all the freelancers who now make up publishing companies. So I hired editors, freelance editors who had worked at the publishing companies that I had been published by. I hired proofreaders who were freelance as well, designers, and yes, I had to pay for stuff myself, but crucially, it's so amazing. I managed to get to the finished book I wanted every time, with the font I want, with the cover I want, with without having an editor making me rewrite or axe, the first 50 pages and change the ending or whatever. But I should say, if you, to anyone who goes the route of self, direct publishing, it's very, very, very important that you don't just believe you're the greatest, but you hire editors and get really good proofreaders, and you don't just, you don't just assume that you write perfect English.
Yeah, of course.
You get really good people on board. And the thing about that is, in most publishing houses now, almost everyone who is brought in is a freelancer. And most editors now do not do hands-on editing themselves. Very, very few. So in most cases, they bring in editors or they bring in proofreaders or whatever. There are very, very few of those on staff. The one people you do have on staff are kind of middle management and marketing people. And the marketing people who call the shots in almost all cases.
Well, yeah. So I propose that this breaking through from the traditional publishing was the treasure that you extracted from the dark wood of the hero's journey, and this new found freedom to write what you wanted and to write what you love. And then the return stage is then moving into the final return stage of the journey. In this stage, it's imperative that the protagonist of the story, or yourself in this case, on your own life hero's journey, brings some boon or elixir to share for the benefit of others, for the wider community. And I suggest that your recent book, The Reason to Write, is certainly a key part of that boon. Sharing your message to writers to write what you love, and sharing your own journey as a writer, and your move away from traditional publishing, and the tools and advice for empowering authors that want to go it alone and write what they want, and sharing the new technology that they can use for this. Would that feel right? Does that feel like the elixir?
You're absolutely right and spot on, Will. I mean, what is so key as a message to shout from the battlements is this: we live in a time in which authors are given freedom for the first time in centuries. These publishers and the publishing model is really only about 200 or 250 years old. In the old days, an author would write something, find someone who'd print it and check the spelling and whatever, and print a few copies. But now, as you allude, there is a new technology, and it is getting better every week. It is astonishingly high spec now. There are companies, there are all kinds of companies. There's companies like Ingram's Lightning Source and others. They make it possible for an author to get their work on every platform possible, and that's in print. But then there's ebook as well, and it's suddenly so easy. Again, it's really, really critical to have your work edited and to take, suggestions from professionals if possible. But everyone has friends who will read their work, and the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is to believe in yourself and to write for yourself. Just like a painter will work out what they want to create, and then they will paint that. And a writer must write for themselves, not for a publisher, not to make some cash, and to believe in themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you also, I think, say in the Reason to Write that it's very important not to listen to anybody who holds you back.
Exactly, and I've been held back so much in my life, and the only reason I've realized this: anyone who's holding you back, they're holding you back for their own insecurities. Cut those people loose. move forward, not to this horizon, but to the horizon after this one. Move forward at a brisk pace.
I wonder though. I mean, was it always that you were that clear about your gut, that you were clear about what was right, and that you didn't want to be detracted by people who were the naysayers, or did you have to learn to trust your own gut? I wonder if was that a skill that was there, or was it something that you've harnessed over time?
Actually, when I was a teenager, an Australian friend, a family friend, said to me just about the time I was going to Africa for the first time, he said, never listen to anyone who holds you back. And I remember in my 20s, I had never forgotten that. And suddenly I woke up one morning and I realized that was the most valuable bit of advice I'd ever been given. If you believe in yourself, and it takes time, it's like a muscle, you build the muscle, you build the belief in yourself. If you believe in yourself strongly enough, you realize that the naysayers they're just unsatisfied, I don't know, unsatisfied people,
You're
and
absolutely
they'll
right.
move on to someone else.
I think it's so true that so often it's their own insecurities, isn't it? That you're mirroring in some way, and they sort of say these things to sort of try to feel better about themselves.
And exactly, and I just want to say this that with social media, which is just such a wretched thing in
Yeah,
some ways, um, I I notice that if I put something online, there's always one gripey, grubby person. It'll be a thing of elation that I'm sharing. There's always some grubby naysayer down in the comments somewhere who's trying to knock it,
yeah.
But and then I think of that person, and um I've come to the conclusion that those people need our help. We need to take them along with us. We need to pull them up through the water because they, for whatever reason, they're trying to push people down, and they should be, trying to pull people up.
So do you ever approach them personally and sort of try to help them?
Um, it, I don't. Sometimes my okay my my desperate wish is to kind of knock them really hard, but I usually do what my father did, which is not to reply at all, because he said always the answer to a fool is silence. And so if someone does puts a sort of a kind, you know what I mean, a nasty kind of
Yeah, yeah,
comment, the best thing you can do is let them fester
yeah,
and
yeah,
don't reply.
yeah. Do you want to just tell me a little bit about your foundation? I'm not sure I can pronounce this correctly, but is it the Scheherazade Foundation?
Yes, you
And
pronounce it
I
perfectly.
think arguably, good, and arguably another elixir that you brought back from your journey, which you set up to empower young women, bridge cultures, and promote folklore and the life lessons that stories have the power to bring. Do you want to elaborate a bit more about what the
Yes,
foundation does?
thank you. During the first lockdown 2 years ago, I spent a lot of time with my darling daughter Ariane, and um, who was then about 19. And I was looking at the world that she will be stepping into, and thinking about the world a lot. In any case, and it really hit me that the world that we live in is configured for kind of balding, rather overweight, middle-aged men like me, and not configured for amazing people like Ariane, my daughter. And I suddenly remembered the story of A Thousand and One Nights, of course, because it's hardwired into me, the Arabian Nights, and how Scheherazade, the queen, um, she had wanted to stop the king Shahryar from killing these young women, taking a new wife every night and having her beheaded at dawn. And rather than just going to the king and saying, stop killing young women, she, Sherazade, did a very clever kind of oriental thing, which was to tell him a story that went on and on and on. So we took inspiration from Sherazade, Ariane and I, and we established this foundation, the Scheherazade Foundation, which which aims to empower young women in unusual ways, in the same way that Scheherazade used an unusual way, telling a story to free women from this tyrant. And it also aims to harness the power of folklore, the knowledge which is trapped inside folklore, and to use it for the good of all humankind.
Fantastic.
And another project we're doing at Scheherazade Foundation, this one to bridge cultures, is we've taken a small part of what was once an immense treasure back to Ethiopia from the UK. It was taken as spoils of battle 150 years ago. So we see initiatives like that, which are kind of offbeat, are a way to bridge cultures and to affect change in an unusual way.
Well, they sound like fascinating and really important initiatives, Tahir. So that's really brilliant you're doing that. Well done. I think I've got one final question, which is if you could give your younger self of, say, 20 years old, one piece of helpful advice for your journey ahead, what would it be?
I think if I had any advice to myself, my younger self, it would be to create on a grand scale, which is what I've done. But it's sometimes in my life, I have fallen foul of my own advice, and I have listened to the naysayers, to the people who told me to, go and get a proper job or stop being a dreamer. Luckily, I haven't listened to sensible advice or non-sensible advice like that for long. And I've always come back to this default setting hardwired inside me, which is to create and to write and keep moving towards the horizon.
Great. That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Tahir. And do you have any new books coming up that you'd like to mention?
Thank you so much. I've got various new books coming out. I've been writing a series kind of based on 1001 Nights. It's called Gin Hunter, and I have the third book in the series about to be launched called The Perplexity. And I've just released The Daydreams of an Octopus, which is a collection of stories. And all through, the summer and the autumn, I've got other projects finally reaching the end of the pipeline, which is always exciting because it means I can start all kinds of new projects as well.
Great. So people want to find out about any of your books and what you're up to. What's the best place to go to on the web?
A good place is always my website,
Exactly.
tahirshah.com.
Perfect.
And I should say I'm a real big fan of a website for readers called Goodreads.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give them a mention because the community on Goodreads is really any author's friend. And I'm so grateful to Goodreads for championing authors.
Okay, great. And is there a website for the Scheherazade Foundation?
Yes, although it's really difficult to spell and even pronounce Scheherazade. We've made the web address, the URL, very easy. It is sf.charity. So S for sugar, great. F for Frederick, .charity. And you'll find everything we're doing right there.
Brilliant. Tahir, thank you so much. It's been really inspiring and fun to have this chat with you. And I wish you all the best with the next leg of your journey.
Thank you so much, Will. It's been an absolute pleasure. What a joy. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Folly or Blisters, produced in association with Conscious Frontiers. I'd like to say a big, heartfelt thank you to Isaac Nichols for editing this podcast series, to Michael Tyack for the music, and to our wonderful partners, which include the trailblazing New Consciousness magazines, Resurgence and Ecologist, and Kindred Spirit, the UK's Frontier Restorative Festival, Medicine Festival, and here in Glastonbury, the vibrant Red Brick Community Enterprise Hub, and also GFM Radio, who've kindly lent us their recording studios. Finally, if you have any friends or family who you think would enjoy and benefit from this podcast, please do spread the word and send positive ripples out into the world. Thanks a million.